Hello. Uh, Very interesting last week on leadership and how we're hemorrhaging as a healthcare system. This week is to touch on leadership at the bedside a bit more in depth to the best of my abilities and what I've encountered and what I've experienced myself. I do believe that unit-based councils are extremely effective. Shared governance is magnificently effective when it's led by a volunteer leader who wants to make a difference for that unit and for their coworkers. It does become a bit of a challenge when nurses are forced to take on this position versus to volunteer. How do you inspire leaders on your unit who might not have the courage to step up, who might feel like, what's the point of this if nothing's ever going to get done, which is what I encountered in many places. Even after my little round for about 3 months as the chair member of the unit which I worked at, that was something that took some, it took the manager part of me to take hold of what needed to get done to have something happen. And then the leadership part of me where what can I do for the unit as a whole. Luckily, I had worked nights on that unit and I worked days. So I was familiar with the staff from the night and the day. That is a key point that I think is extremely important. Which some managers, in some places you have a day manager but not a night manager, and they have to find time to communicate with their nurses on both shifts, which mostly has them speaking to the charge nurse, which is the leader of that unit while a manager's gone. Don't quote me on any of these things. These are just some things I've encountered. I know with a lot of different organizations, they'll have maybe a supervisor, a manager, and a few other leaders on a unit to help run things smoothly for patient satisfaction. However, I've worked in the private sector where a lot of that is micromanaged, and sometimes the micromanaging can feel overwhelming. And then there's also the public sector, whereas volunteer for and pretty much at that time the hospital was going through the process of receiving a Magna certification to be a magnet hospital, and that's specifically targeting nurses being leaders and to feel like they can grow in the environment and a place that is safe for them to advocate for patients' safety and to bring up any concerns. So I was very lucky to have that experience of going through the whole process and going through the interviews to get the certification and to really dive into what our nurses needed on the unit, because I know I needed a lot of stuff as a staff nurse. And every time I brought something up to management or to charge nurse, it was kind of like it didn't get taken into account because it was little things like, hey, we should stock these certain things because it make a flow easier on a unit. Things like perhaps if we have this shift do this and this shift do that. I know they had a system where we would switch hours and times as to when patients were going to get bathed and when they were going to have a little break and which nurse aides were going to have that responsibility. But of course, going back to being in a hospital setting where it is extremely dynamic, it is always changing. So let's say you have that shift and you don't have sufficient staff. So can they really follow those same strategies or things to go? Well, yes, it can, but that's where leadership is important, because yes, we can continue to do that. Now that continuity is going to change. It's not going to be exactly how we said it would be, but now it's we need to find a way to encourage and inspire critical thinking for a lot of these leaders to say, you know what, this thing they told us might not work, but let's try this way. An example, we don't have enough nurse techs to assist in bathing, but there are some patients that are much more prone to getting soiled quicker, or if they're in need of a bath or anything like that, then now you just reprioritize. This can also be challenging because there are times when charge nurses themselves don't have the techs, they have patients, and that's when it can get a little struggling. However, every time I worked, because I have worked when we're fully staffed and I have worked when we're not staffed. I've also worked as a float nurse where I came in because they didn't have staff. And even with me in there, they were still short-staffed. I've also worked in going into a setting and assisting the staff when they don't have enough staff, but the only thing I could do was assist with the flow of work. So there's different angles as to what one can do, and I think that I aspired to do whatever I could to make the flow as smooth as possible for myself and for those around me, because that provided a really good safety flow for the patients that we were caring for who don't know the flow. They're anxious about being in the hospital. Maybe they're upset that they're in the hospital. So there are many, many things going around this. So the small things. Yes. I used to get pushed off like, oh no, that's not, we're going to focus on this, Gracie, and not that. And I really appreciated to get the experience to encounter people who said, oh, you're one of those that can be done, and oh, you're just going to come in and try to make a change and nothing's going to happen. I decided to put it up on myself to, let me see what I can do if I just tried. I tried, something came of it, and it was a very wonderful experience, to the point that when I left that unit to go to a different unit, because I was in step down and I transferred to ICU, they were still doing some of the things that were reintroduced. Now, listen to what I said. Reintroduced. I did not create anything special, unique, or different. I simply reintroduced a concept that was pushed aside because perhaps someone didn't have the time or the aspiration or such. Having taken some leadership classes during my master's, it really helped me want to make the attempt to make a change, even if it was as small as the workflow of a unit. Now, I wonder what would that be like everywhere else. And when I transferred to ICU, personally, it was a different flow for what I was used to. And pretty much 75% of the staff were all travel nurses. So there was no really strong bond with the nurses, and there was new and old nurses, and half the staff was pregnant and they were not there because they had to be on leave, but so they had new people in when I had started that area. And this is around the time that COVID occurred, so a lot of nurses I knew that I wanted to work with were gone to do work elsewhere where they were needed. And with this example, all of it is the hospital is always changing. So how can we assist in sort of not creating a foundation, but just using the things we already know and actually put them to play, versus just thinking that nothing's going to change and there's no need to have someone come in and make some changes. There are no changes to be made, but we can integrate some of the things we already know. And when they're not being used, well, of course, they're not going to work. Now, how do we get there? And I think we get there with leadership. I was grateful to have had that position and encouraging others in my team to take on the lead, because that position would be pushed onto someone else so that they could get that practice of leadership and perhaps step up the plate and growth in the nursing area. Now, I've seen different methods used from California all the way to North Carolina and in Texas and in New Mexico. A lot of it, the workflow can be very fast paced, and the demands change and the needs change. But the attitude of how nurses worked together, that doesn't need to change. We already have a nursing scope of practice, which says a lot of things. But of course, care for yourself, then care for others. Just being there for what it is that you need, for what the patients need, and for what your team needs. Even if you're just a nurse, even if you're not the charge nurse, even if you're not the manager, it is important that every nurse leader who is a leader understands that every nurse under them is also a leader. I really, really like Michael Abrashoff. This quote, he says, "Leadership is mostly the art of doing simple things very well." He wrote the book, it's Your Ship, and it's on management techniques. But I think management and leadership integrate together. I'm going to read a few of these. It's take responsibility for your team. Now, that's hard sometimes. I've seen for some managers and or leaders, because they might feel like, oh, that person's not going to listen to me, or oh, I've already had that conversation with them, or oh, they've already been coached. But checking things off of list is great. It's kind of like having a baby and then like, okay, the diapers are in the bag. I got the wipies. I got the baby powder. Okay, fine. Where's the baby? Like, where's the nurse that you're trying to inspire and lead? And I think it is a tough job to be around nurses who are overworked. You're overworked yourself as a manager or leader, but this is not every single day. There are times of breathing, and when you have those times of breathing, notice your nurses. So take responsibility for your team. Foster culture of accountability on your team. I know this can be tricky because I've also worked in a position where I assisted, I was a registry nurse. So I would get put into different units to assist when they needed nurses in those areas. Or I did admissions and discharges, or I transferred patients with heart monitors. But I always had to go and speak to the charge nurse, and I had to speak to the HUC, and I had to, go and walk around and see if anybody needed anything, and I really enjoyed that. I could do that myself, and I did it in a way where I enjoyed it. Now, how can we get other people to do the same thing? Because they do want to do the same thing. It's just, are they as aspired to do it? Or are we pushing them to do it? I don't know. But one of the biggest things is lead by example. Now, a lot of what I did in taking these leadership positions, I didn't really just do because I knew how to do them. Absolutely not. I knew how to do these things because I saw other nurses doing it, and I thought that was awesome. So, with Michael Abrashoff's lead by example. Show a commitment to excellent patient care, even in small ways, to inspire your team. I know one hospital I worked at, it was Commit to Sit. And one unit that had the most recognition for some reason, but it was a very tough unit to work on, which they received a lot of psych patients, was they acknowledged a lot of their nurses to who would commit to sit. It was a simple thing, is acknowledging a nurse who would actually commit to sit, whether it be even for 2 minutes, 5 minutes. They had this program where they had a chair installed into each room, and they would grab it, and then they'd speak to the patient if they needed some time face to face, versus just being a nurse who passes meds, cleans, and does all these things. Now, like I said, I know that sometimes there are times when we don't have the staff to do that, but when we do, it is possible, and we are doing it. It's just, are we recognizing those who are doing it? So lead by example. Speak to that family, speak to that nurse. You have other nurses inspiring other nurses, but if we don't recognize those, or we don't see our team, we don't know what they need. Perhaps they don't need anything, and then that's okay. Perhaps all they need is just a certain time of vacation and whatnot. I get it. I've heard it all, or at least to what I know, and I'm sure you've heard way more if you have heard more. Now, the other one in relation to that one is listen to your people. This was a hard part because the manager, if a patient came up and would say, when I was doing the unit-based counsel, if a nurse would come and say something to the manager, okay, go ahead and send me an email. Now, nobody wanted to send an email. Nobody wanted to sit in front of the computer and send an email. Like, I could not figure out what to do, but eventually I figured, well, let me go around and ask everyone what they need, what they think we need. And even if it's the same mimicking message, like, oh, well, we need more of this, and this person isn't doing that, and you gear them back to what it is that you control the conversation as to what is really needed. Now, I know we don't have the staff. What else do we need to make better when we don't have the staff? You see, but there's times when it could be a little difficult, and we might take things personally as manager or as a leader or as a charge nurse, whatever, where someone kind of fights back like, oh, well, we don't have this. I've been that person. I know, I get it. And I've had such great supervisors and mentors that really kind of took deep breaths, and they did what was best for them. So now it's listen to your people. Create regular opportunities for nurses to share their thoughts and concerns. Now, this is where the unit-based counsel comes in. But then even in that conversation, everything needs to get documented. Now, this was hard because every time I wanted to bring something up, it was like, send me an email, or go ahead and write everything down that this nurse needs. Now, there were some nurses who didn't want to talk. We were like, oh, well, the rolling eyes, well, I'm not going to say anything because then I'm going to get fired, or whatnot. So I went ahead and the simplicity of a $36 suggestion box that can be placed in the nurse's lounge with little papers and such. Now, every way something can be done differently. This is where encouraging innovation and, of course, having someone step up to the plate to understand that to understand how things work financially. And I mentioned that that's important because every time there's a huddle, what are some of the top conversations? Budget for certain things that can be afforded for the unit. We're like, oh, well, we don't have the budget for that. We don't have the budget for that. We don't have the budget for that. And those are typically some conversations that are had. Now, which is why I think it's okay to bring that up as an example on how to invite nurses to understand that process, because that is something that as a leader one must keep in mind for patients and for the necessities that we do need on a unit and for the hospital as a culture as well. Now, I didn't always agree with this, but in order to get a fantastic new bladder scanner, we actually needed the budget for that, and those things are expensive for some god-awful reason, but it's okay. Anyhow, the other one is communicate purpose clearly. What is the purpose of anyone working, right? Before I got my first job, I looked up the hospital and I looked at what the mission and values were. Someone had said, or I had read an article that talked about, if your values fit with your mission and values, then perhaps that would be a good place for you to work. But, I worked in a facility that had my mission and values, But on the back end, there was a lot of importance and emphasis on the finances and the pretty much the budget, and that I kind of lost what the meaning of compassion was in all of that. And it was about the numbers, the HCAP scores, this percentage, that percentage, and there was no room to discuss compassion care, speaking to, having a connection with the group, none of that, which is, I think if we're working with humans, is kind of a good thing to present. I mean, I think it's important. And as a nurse, I'm sure if I think it's important, other nurses think it's important. So it's also regularly remind the team of the impact that they make on patients' lives to reignite their passion for nursing. And I think sometimes we miss this one, and when we don't present the importance of, let's say, a shower, instead of getting after people like, well, this needs to get done like this because of this, because we're lacking our scores and our scores are terrible on this, we're at 20%. Okay. But are we talking about that patient's life? How if we don't bathe that patient and that patient gets an infection, that they can die, that they might have more stay in the hospital, that they won't be able to see their family, that they have to get poked more often. Like, come on, we're not, these things we know. But I think that when we communicate the purpose clearly and often, that continues to ride the motion of what the mission and the values are of an organization. Building a culture of trust. Yes, this one can be difficult with our high turnover of nurses. And I'm one of those who has gone to many different hospitals, and all goals and challenges are different. But when you invite a new nurse to your team, they're there to take care of the patients that are on your unit. And if we pay them, or if they get paid to do a job, I think we also need to invite them into the culture to encourage them to do those things. Like, what are the goals and challenges that they need to meet for that unit, versus I'm just here to get a paycheck, goodbye. Because I've also done the travel nurse thing, and it works so well as a travel nurse. I can come in and be with a different team who works differently. And I've heard it all. Oh yeah, that place is terrible. They're mean over there. And I've worked at places where people did not want to work, and I've heard all the kinds of stories. And sometimes I realize that reflects a lot of the person that's saying it. And that's okay. Some people, everyone's different. But being transparent in your communication with your team, even though I was a travel nurse, I was transparent and communicated with my manager to like, hey, this is what's happening, and this might be unsafe for this reason and that reason. And it's not to get anyone fired, because I've been put under the gun for that as well. And I think that that's important. That goes back to keeping people accountable. Empowering your team. You did a great job. It's awkward to hear those words sometimes, because you don't hear it often. And when you do hear it, there's some kind of false promises in the back of that, and I don't know why. It's hard, it's like, but it doesn't have to be. Now, with empowering the team, not so much just about saying, do a good job. It's also to delegate responsibilities to nurses based on their strengths, allowing them to lead projects or initiatives. I was put in a position to be a charge nurse, but it turned out I wasn't that great at that, because I focused so much on certain things that didn't really fit in with what we needed to do as a unit. You had house supervisor delegating a certain way of what patients were going to come onto the unit. Then you had the manager's opinion on what it was. Then you had the charge nurse's opinion on what it should be. And it's kind of like having that courage to say, I don't think this is right. Can we speak to someone else? guide me through this process of why you think this patient needs to come here when I have this, and this going on. I would always hold the line sometimes, and I stressed out so much about it because it was just not very fluid. That might be the manager in me. But if something's not fluid as so, and you're having one person say, hey, hold the line, and you're having someone else, oh yeah, that's fine, and then that person crashes on that unit, then they need to go to ICU, and things didn't flow so well. It's not our lives it's not just our license that is on the line, it is our patient's life that's on the line. I think we forget that for some reason. I don't know. And maybe to someone, it might be a minor thing. You got your nurses are tired. They're tired of admitting. They're tired of this. They're tired of that. And you just need the patient to go somewhere. That's also safety. And that's part of not trying to hold the line too far, too long. But empowering your team to be autonomous. However, how do we teach them to be autonomous? And that's where I go into the teams and I sort of present how that works, because every team is different. The other one is last one that I'll mention here today is break down hierarchies, because there's so many on here. I can't, Michael Abrashoff was pretty specific with certain things. Breaking down hierarchies, we already know that in the nursing field. This, you're going by who's the next person to talk to. First, your charge nurse, maybe speak to an experienced nurse, maybe they're your buddy that you're matched with, or maybe a charge nurse, or maybe, rapid response team, or then if something doesn't get taken care of, the manager, and so on and so forth. But creating a collaborative environment where nurses and physicians and they can all work as equals together. Now I'm going to sort of brief through these as a title. Celebrate successes. Adaptability and innovation. Measure what matters. Create ownership and success. Those are kind of all tied into what I mentioned earlier. But these are some things that are important as a leader. And not just things I've done, but things I've repeated to do that I've seen other leaders do that I think is extremely effective. And to continue to encourage that kind of culture, responsibility, and accountability, mostly accountability. And to just have the courage to have that conversation, or just to, maybe not a conversation, but to present it with feedback, with courage and with love behind it, right? I've had heart, or first you speak from your heart, then from your head, then from your heart, ending it with your heart. I think those are great things to implement. But what are we doing to really follow up with that implementation? And with so many changes occurring, do we have space to evaluate how our employees are doing? The very people who we depend on to take care of the patients that we have in this magnificent, huge hospitals. Now, if any other questions or concerns, about any of this, or any kind of inquiry, come pick my brain. I'd love that. Or if you have an experience that any of this relates to you, or you think this is important for your team, let me know. I'd be happy to share some things and make friends who also believe in the power of leadership, especially for us nurses who, as many say, we worked really hard to get to where we are. And I think that we love to work hard. However, there's also the burning out thing, which I'll speak about next week, and we'll see how that goes. But thanks for listening, and bye.